Let's move our conversation slightly ahead now. We've had the Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court joining us. We are now also privileged to be joined by the country manager of the Kenya cluster for the IFC. And the Kenya cluster covers Kenya, Burundi, Malawi, Rwanda, Somalia, Tanzania, and where the proverb comes from, Uganda. Amena Arif is with us in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us today. And we want to have a conversation about increasing market access for women-owned businesses. This is because as IFC, you did some study, and you'll tell us about that study, and then what you found and what you thought the solutions would be and how far you've gone with that. But let's start by understanding the IFC. For many people who don't know who the IFC is.
Right. So I think you're right. Many people don't know who the IFC is. We are a part of the World Bank Group. So the World Bank Group is composed of IBRD, which is typically and traditionally what you know as the World Bank. Their primary purpose, along with IDA, is to interact with the government to support public sector development, right? So they work with the government, if I can put it that way. IFC is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. So our mandate is to work with the private sector because our belief is the public sector alone in any country does not have the resources or the capability to drive the entire development that a country needs. The private sector has to play a leading role there. And increasingly, we see the private sector playing a bigger and bigger role, especially in the post-COVID recovery period. Unless the private sector steps up, you've seen the fiscal space in most of our countries is limited. You know, your public sector cannot just write a check and do what's needed. The private sector has to step up, create the jobs, create the opportunity, move the country forward.
So what does the IFC do to help this? Do you invest in companies? Do you loan money to companies? Do you buy off companies?
Okay, so maybe we don't buy off companies, but we do invest in companies. So IFC it supports in a couple of different ways. We do direct investments through debt, through equity, guarantees, basically any form of capital provision, if you will. Then we also provide advisory services. So we help companies. In some areas, there are things that they want to do, but are unable to do. So we bring in examples from other parts of the world. We have teams that are specialized in things, everything from climate smart agriculture to SME capacitization, all kinds of advisory work we do, environmental and social advisory. And then we also have let me call it another advisory window, which works on what we call the enabling environment, right? The regulations, the policies, how do we help those? We don't work on policy directly. That is what the World Bank does. But certainly we help inform the discussion and, we work on those enabling environments. So that's more or less broadly what we do.
The work that you do. Yeah. Let's delve into the topic for the day, which is about increasing access for women-owned businesses. IFC conducted a study seeking to understand the barriers, the challenges, the opportunities for various SMEs in the country. And then you also now concentrated on women-owned businesses. Give us the highlights of what you found in that study.
Okay. So in our role as a development financial institution, we are the largest DFI in the world that's focused on the private sector in developing countries. The problem of women SMEs or women economic empowerment is not unique to this part of the world. It does exist everywhere, so we've seen it. If I can just sort of give some perspective on that, globally, 1% of the procurement contracts go to women-owned or women-led businesses. 1%, okay? In Kenya, that number is better. It's at 3%, but
Wow.
That still means that 97 out of every 100 procurement contracts go to businesses that are not women-owned or women-led, right? So that's really the starting point for us. And IFC, unless we're able to empower women and the youth, we cannot get to the kind of development that, we're aiming for. So we have to bring all of them into the fold to be able to get us where we want to be. So that's really where our work begins, right? So the study you're talking about highlights some of these gaps. It highlights some of these issues and why the involvement of women-owned and women-led businesses in, procurement value chains is so very low. And the 3% number that you see in Kenya, while it may look more impressive than the 1% globally, the reality is most of these are really low value-added contracts. So most of these women businesses are subcontractors, and they operate at the lower end of the value chain. They'll provide catering services or cleaning services or things like that. Often that's the case instead of providing the more higher value-added goods or services to companies.
Why is this?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Why is this that we see such a low penetration then of funding for women-led or women-led? Is it lack of expertise? Is it lack of putting themselves out there in terms of the businesses that they own or lead? Why would the number be so low vis-a-vis others?
So all of the above, right? There is absolutely a gap. There's an access to finance gap. It's there for all SMEs. All SMEs have issues getting the capital they need to grow. Women businesses have more issues in getting access to that capital. So certainly that's one thing. The other thing is, they don't always have access to the kind of operational capacity building that they need. And the third is an information gap, if you will, or access to information, which leads into access to market gap, where essentially they don't know how to look for and access these procurement contracts sometimes, that they don't have those networks. They don't know how to get to them. They don't know what to do when they see even if they hear of the opportunity, how to capitalize on it. So really it's a mixture of all of these. So in this program that we're trying to do, it's called Sourcing to Equal. It's a global platform that IFC is putting together. And the program in Kenya is the first country-specific program that we're doing under Sourcing to Equal. So we're hoping, Sourcing to Equal aims to empower 5,000 women-owned, women-led businesses to participate in procurement value chains. And in Kenya, we're hoping that by the end of our work here, it's a 3-year program, that at least we will have capacitized 1,300 businesses, women-owned and led businesses, to be part of procurement chains. So that's actually, we're trying to bridge some of those gaps.
So do I hear you to be saying that there are very many women who have an interest in being part and parcel of this space that you speak of, and that all the things that you've mentioned are some of the contributing factors to their not participating at the level that they could?
Yes, I think women businesses don't have a dearth of ambition or desire to grow. I think sometimes they lack the means and the tools and the skill sets that are required to grow. I think even companies, if you look at it from the other side, it's not like companies go out and say, well, we don't want to, source from women-owned businesses. Companies are really now committed, right? They've seen the government also pledge to do 30% of their procurement, with the gender lens. But how do they go about it? How do they find these businesses? How do they connect with them? So that's why Sourcing to Equal works on both sides. It works on the demand side with these companies, and we've signed on with 10 companies across different industries in Kenya, and to basically help them figure out, how do they source more from women-owned and led businesses. And then on the supply side, how do we get the women businesses up there?
For the longest time, one of the problems that was discussed in this country was the education of women. And very many forward-looking people put a lot of effort into getting the girl child, as we say, into a position where the opportunities available to them were equal to that of the boy child. Now, that has seen an upsurge of human resource capital among women. And you see it even in the occupation of positions of authority right across the country. Now, are we saying, therefore, that when it comes to business, and especially this particular sector of procurement, that even with this upsurge in human resource and capacity and skill building, that women still don't seem to move in the direction of occupying this space. So are we saying that there's an underlying problem that stops women from utilizing a capacity they already have in terms of education, skill set, and yet when it comes to businesses, somehow there isn't enough movement in that direction? If there is a gap, what is that gap and what causes it?
So I think there are things that contribute to that gap. Certainly it's not a dearth of talent or skill. I have met amazing women in Kenya, across all parts of the spectrum. So and I think the country's done an amazing job on education attainment. So women are not lacking behind there in any which way. But yes, they do sometimes lack the toolkit that they need to grow into those businesses, right?
Do you think it's cultural?
Well, I come from a different culture, so it's very hard for me to opine on this. But I think in all cases, there's a cultural element. There's a perception element.
Actually, you've got to the heart of the matter, because one of the things that international organizations or funding agencies have been accused of is coming up with plans and schemes, even with research, to try and understand the people with whom they wish to work. Now, if there's an absence of that understanding or a clarity of it, it means whatever program or plan you have,
will not work.
Yes, the implementation will go belly up.
So we're very careful. I mean, from an IFC perspective, if you think about it, the number of resources we have based in Kenya, it's one of our largest offices in the world.
Why is that?
Well, it covers the region, not just Kenya. So we do cover the broader region. But that means we have a lot of expertise that we have brought to this part of the world. And the idea is not to bring in solutions from other parts of the world and say, I found this solution in Asia, and now we can just roll it out in Kenya. It never works. So our entire idea, and that's why we're working with local companies and we're doing the research locally, is to see what are the specific gaps here. How do we come in and help fill some of those specific gaps? And these 10 companies, they're leaders in their fields. We're talking about companies like Kengen, Safaricom, ABSA, Stanbic, Unilever, Bamburi Cement, Nevas, Tropical Brands, Bitco, and Lineplast Group. They're already gender forward, if you will. And the reason that we're working with them is A, because of their commitment to the issue, and B, because we really want to create role models. That's the demonstration effect. Businesses are different from NGOs. They have to see a business case for doing something.
Yeah.
And there is a very strong business case that we hope to demonstrate by working with these companies to say, when you diversify your supplier base, in every which way, not just I'm going to source now from this country and this country instead of just that country, but, across the spectrum, you reduce your costs, you bring in more competition, you diversify the risk profile of your supply chain. That's good business.
Did you document adequately in your research the sort of businesses that we find many women, say for instance in Kenya, getting involved in?
Yes, we do have research around that.
And so the understanding and the wherewithal of upscaling these so that they stop being the menial businesses that they are and growing them. Because I heard you mention things like cleaning, catering, and yet there are institutions of this very nature that are huge businesses.
Yep.
So if they've begun there, it means they have that capacity to at least start. So are we saying that what IFC is planning to do is to get such individuals, more so where the bulk of our population is in the rural areas, to growing whatever they have to a point where it can actually become big? Or are you just focused on working with people who are already big?
No, the entire purpose is to add, to capacitize, at the end of the day, 1,300 more women-led businesses to participate in those higher value procurement chains. Right? That is the purpose. Because they're supplying, there's the subcontractors to the big guys
Right.
already.
So then what's the action, Amena? What's the action then that would then lead to these 1,300 or how many others that you might
Is it
add in the
1,300 or
future?
13,000?
1,300.
1,300, okay.
So what's the action that says there's a woman-led business out here, there's an enterprise that essentially is waiting for this catalyst? what happens? Like the direct action that happens? Is it invitation for training? What happens?
So actually, there are a few things which we're doing, again, as I said, on the demand side and the supply side. So these 10 companies have formed a peer learning platform, and they have committed to voluntary targets that are time bound. So these companies have stepped up and said, we will do this to improve the gender sort of profile of our procurement chains, right? So that's one side of it. So we're going to help those companies figure it out. Because then often, like I said, they don't always know what they have to do, how to get to that, improved gender balance.
Yeah.
So we're going to be working with them on that peer learning platform. We then are also putting in place, basically a matchmaking service, if you will, with buyers and suppliers, bringing them together so they can see and meet and, kind of try and pick up what they need from those typically SME businesses. And then, of course, we're having workshops to support those women, so capacity building of those women-led businesses to see to help them figure out how to access those opportunities. So a number of, it's basically a combination of all of these things rather than just one activity.
The 10 that I've signed on so far, and the others that you're looking to sign up as you go on with the sourcing to equal, the 10 businesses, what do they sign up for? Is there a specific commitment that they come in and say, so we are committing that we are going to have 30%, 40%, 50% of our procurement going to women-led businesses? Or are they also saying that out of our expenditure of X billion shillings a year, 30% of that will go to, because you can say 30% of your processes are going to be outsourced to women, then you'll end up still getting, supply of paper, supply of water, and the other things that you're talking about. How do you bring them into committing to the big business?
So each of these businesses, it's not something that we provide. It's something that each of those businesses has stepped up for. So they have voluntarily given targets, which are different across each business because, these are very different industries, to say this is what we will do within this time frame. And they will then, literally monitor themselves. These are voluntary targets. We're just going to help them. We're supporting them in that peer learning to achieve those targets. And then hopefully, that's just a starting step and they can go on further from there.
Have you been able to identify, even with this study and beyond, the gaps that we have? Look at the big procurement needs of the private sector, and then look at the companies, the women-led companies or women-owned companies, and whatever sector of business they're involved in. So, for example, if it's big contract like a bank is going to be building new offices across the country, do we have many women-led construction companies? Have you identified some of those gaps and seen, so we have a gap in this area, maybe we need to capacity build?
Yeah, but that's what the matchmaking is about, right? That's what the buyer-supplier matchmaking is about, to see what is it that the buyers need and what is it that the supply is available for.
So what do you do? What's a commitment by the IFC now? In this program, in the Sourcing to Equal program, once you've done, let's say, this matchmaking session, and it emerges that we have a serious gap in women-led companies that would be able to offer these kind of services, what do you do?
So we have different things we do. One, we work with businesses in those industries. We can work with them. Again, we have to have willing partners, right? But we could work with them. And then our role in SME, in the support of SMEs and women doesn't end at Sourcing to Equal. Sourcing to Equal is just a very small part of what IFC does, right? We also have access to finance, which we do through financial institutions. So we've worked with several banks to enable SME financing for them, right? Both under advisory as well as investment programs. And several of those have a gender lens to it. So when we work with banks, we say, okay, you know what, we will help provide funding for SMEs for X million dollars, and 30% of that funding, 40% of that funding, whatever that number is, should go to women-owned and led businesses. So our sort of commitment to the gender agenda and the SME agenda does not begin and end at Sourcing to Equal. This is just one part of it. We have a very broad sort of engagement with SMEs, both on, through digitization, through technology, through some of our venture capital work. So.
I'm thoroughly impressed.
You are.
Yeah.
It's a good job that it's being done.
I just have a final question.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you see this then? Because you said it's in the very beginning, you said that maybe paraphrasing, but that it's then almost impossible for governments to fulfill their function without looking at what a private sector can do to contribute to that. So do you see this? Does IFC see this as then an absolute complementary role without which, I mean, you have hundreds of businesses that will then, benefit from this and then essentially input to the economy. So is this a complementary role to government that is impossible to do without?
I think for a country's development, unless the private sector steps up fully, most of the jobs have to be created by the private sector. And within the private sector, it's the SMEs. That's the bulk of it, right? So unless we're able to get, as I said, women fully involved, SMEs fully involved, the youth fully involved in economic activity, we cannot achieve our development goals. The government, any government alone, cannot do that. And to have a resilient recovery, to have a sustainable recovery, not to have a recovery with growth spurts and, up and downs, to be able to employ all our youth productively, to be able to capitalize on the agricultural potential, we have to get youth involved in it. We have to get, our productivity gap filled. You can't do that with the government alone. The private sector has a key role to play. And I think in a resilient green recovery, right, the private sector's role is absolutely critical. It is very much complementary to the government. It does not, it does not take away from what the government needs to do.
Yeah.
But the private sector's role is becoming increasingly more critical.
I mean, a risk mitigation question here. We've seen it with the public sector. So government comes in and says, our policy is 30% of procurement in government is going to be to women, youth, and persons with disabilities. What have we seen happen is people go and register companies using women as their registered director shareholders, but the beneficial owner of that company is male. Or the beneficial owner of that company is not youth or is not a person with disability. Now, similar thing. If we see these big companies like the ones you've mentioned, these are big financial institutions. Safaricom is there. Is it Kengen or Kenya Power? Kengen is there. And the others like Tropical. If the people who are operating in business notice that, Safaricom is now saying that they are actually dedicating a certain quota to women-owned and women-led businesses, crafty people. You will register that company and it'll look like it's women-owned, but the beneficial owner is Eric Latif. What do they do about that? Are they digging deeper to find out, is this actually woman-owned?
We place a lot of trust in the partners we sign up with. So we do trust their level of both due diligence and actual support for this. I don't think anyone is looking to sort of whitewash this issue in any way, let me put it that way. And crafty people, yes, I've heard about crafty Kenyan dogs also. So, I mean, we'll have to see how that goes.
Well, thank you very much, Amena, for joining us. Thank you for this
Thank you for having me.
And all the best as you continue rolling out the Sourcing to Eco program with the private sector companies that have signed up, with the SMEs that are also signing up and saying we'd like to participate in this. How can an SME get in touch with this program? How can they participate in this?
We have a website. I think Sourcing to Equal, a lot of information is out there. I think all of these companies are excellent brand ambassadors for us. So, for this program. And I think there's, online, all of this information can be available, including our research.
Amena Arif is the IFC country manager for Kenya cluster, covering several countries in the region. We've been talking about increasing market access for women-owned businesses. Come back again soon.
Anytime. Thank you.